In this video, we're taking a look at the new DF54 grinder from Turin. Before we get started, I just want to extend a big thanks to the guys over at Espresso Outlet for sending me the DF54 to check out, to review, and to share with you. Now, obviously, by looking at it, you can probably tell that this thing is very, very similar to the other DF line grinders, or at least the newer generation of the other DF line grinders, except for it's got smaller burrs at 54 millimeters and a smaller motor, and of course, the physical size of it is smaller, but how much of a difference does that really make? It has the same build quality as the newer generation DF grinders with an aluminum body and a nice powder coated finish. There are a few plastic parts on here like the dosing cup and this portafilter holder. It does feel kind of flimsy, and I feel like if you were too rough with it or somehow it got bumped into or the grinder got knocked over, that this would probably break pretty easily. So I do wish that was made out of metal. I do, however, like this rubber insert angled dosing cup holder thing that you can remove from the portafilter holder here. I like that it sort of isolates the dosing cup to minimize vibrations and stuff, which you probably wouldn't have too much of because this thing operates pretty smoothly, and these components being plastic, you're probably not going to have too much of like vibration or rattle noise. But I like that it does sort of isolate the dosing cup, and it also puts it at a better angle and gets it a little bit closer to the exit chute, which I really like. Even though this grinder does operate fairly cleanly, it does enable you to get this a little bit closer to the chute, and the mess of any little rogue coffee particles is greatly reduced because of that. One thing that I think is kind of weird is that there's no adjustable 0-point indicator like you'd have on some of the other DF grinders. Just this fixed plastic arrow here for your indication of where you're at in your grind size. The actual touch point of the burrs is pretty far past the 0 indicator on the dial, with no way to adjust for that. But after using it for a bit and discovering that you don't have to go past that 0 mark to get a coffee dialed in for espresso, I got pretty used to it. This thing gets really fine, so I don't think you're gonna have to go below the 0 point or even get close to the burr touch point to get a coffee dialed in. I've been getting really great results with this in the 1 to 4 range for espresso, depending on the coffee and the style of shot that I'm going for. The grind adjustment dial here is stepless, it's smooth, and it's easy to operate, just like the other newer DF line grinders. This grinder comes equipped with 54 millimeter flat stainless steel burrs that are about 15% smaller than the DF64's 64 millimeter burrs. However, I don't think this grinder gives you 15% less performance. I actually think this guy is pretty closely matched from a performance and taste standpoint to the newer DF64s with the standard burrs. The burr geometry on these 54 millimeter burrs looks close to the burr geometry style on the newer generation DF64 standard burrs. So you would expect the cup profiles for both espresso and filter to be very similar, if not basically the same. The only difference that you'll probably notice in performance between this and the DF64 is the amount of time it takes to grind the same amount of coffee, which is a completely normal thing when it comes to smaller diameter burrs. Like most of the other DF line grinders with the standard flat burrs, this seems to perform much better for espresso than it does for other brewing methods from a taste perspective, and it produces really nice grinds at finer grind settings. It does have a plasma generator or ionizer here in the exit chute, which helps to reduce static and keeps messes to a minimum, depending on the coffee you're grinding. I have noticed with lighter roasted coffees that you will get some rogue coffee particles and pieces of chaff and stuff like that kind of stuck along the bottom edge of the chute here and around the exit portion of the chute, but it's really not that bad, and overall it's really clean like most of the other newer line DF grinders. It's got an anti-popcorn insert here to help keep coffee beans from jumping out, especially if you hot start, which I like to do. It's got a 58 millimeter food grade plastic transparent dosing cup. I do prefer the heavier duty aluminum dosing cups that come with the newer like DF64 and DF83 grinders, but I know a lot of people out there do like the clear dosing cup, and at the end of the day, they basically work just the same, so that's just a personal preference. Like most new decent grinders, I've been seeing about 0.1 to 0.3 grams of retention at most, and of course it does include the bellows here if you want to use that to get the last little bit of your coffee out. It can hold about 20 grams of coffee here without the bellows, and with the bellows, it'll hold about 50 grams of coffee or so, but you start getting coffee, of course, up into the bellows area, and this bellows does come off fairly easily, so if you are going to use a larger amount of coffee and kind of use the bellow as a hopper and you're going to have coffee in here, just be careful you don't accidentally knock it off, because then you'll have a mess on your hands. It's got a 150 watt AC motor that spins at 1400 RPM, which is the same RPM that the DF64 spins at. I was a little concerned about the smaller wattage motor, especially when it comes to denser, lighter roasted coffees, but I haven't had a single problem with this thing stalling or doing anything weird or having any issues grinding through even larger doses of lightly roasted coffee. If space is a concern for you and you need something with a smaller footprint, I think this guy would probably work for you. It's 7 inches deep, 4.5 inches wide, and about 12 inches tall with the bellows on, and it fits under most kitchen cabinets very easily. And now that we've gotten through all those specs, let's talk about the most important thing with any coffee grinder, the taste. For espresso, I've been getting some really great shots with this guy. It even highlights some of the more desirable flavor notes in lighter roasted coffees, which I prefer on espresso. But of course, it does very good with medium and darker roasted coffees, especially for milk-based drinks if that's more your style. For filter coffee, I did feel like the aroma and flavor notes were a little bit more subdued with this versus something that's more filter focused, which of course is to be expected with this sort of more universal style burr geometry that's not necessarily geared for being filter specific. It's definitely not a bad thing. It's just something that's sort of inherent in the design, and the coffees weren't bad. They just weren't what I've experienced those coffees at with other more filter focused grinders. So if you're wanting something that's more filter focused, that is definitely something you're going to want to take into consideration. However, a more filter-focused grinder with a more filter-focused burr is most likely going to cost you more money. So what's the advantage to spending more money on the DF64 versus the DF54? Well, the DF64, having a more common size 64mm burr, is going to give you more options for future burr upgrades if that's something you might be interested in doing. The DF64s also grind faster and have a stronger motor, so there are some definite benefits to getting something like the DF64 versus this if any of those things that I just listed are important to you. I think if you are looking at this as your first flat burr grinder, or you do a lot more espresso than filter brewing, this is in your budget, and you're not necessarily interested in the possibility of changing burrs in the future, then I think this is an absolutely fantastic grinder, again, especially at this $229 US price point. So if you're interested in getting a DF54 for yourself, or if maybe you have more questions about them, please check out the link in the description over to my friends at Espresso Outlet, because I'm sure they would be happy to answer any questions you have about this grinder and help you place an order for one if you want one. Thanks for watching, take care, and we'll see you on the next one.